What is up, dudes, lady dudes? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, I'm doing a little discussion video about floodgates in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And the different types and how they affect certain decks and how they're relevant and why these ones are probably the best ones in the game. Keep in mind, this is going to be like a general kind of discussion, just talking about floodgates in general, not specific floodgates and how they act in today's meta right now. That's totally something I'm down to do in the future, but, different time, different place. I'm totally down if you guys really want a video like that, but at least for this one, I'm keeping it just to generically, just talking about floodgates in general, and because they are like a very specific kind of niche type of card in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think they're really interesting, all the different types of floodgates we have in the game. So, first things first, I did break up after looking at like all the main floodgates in the game. I did break them up into kind of 3 different categories on the way that they floodgate your opponent. So we're going to be going into each one and kind of discussing, what they do and why they're relevant why they're good, like why that is like an effective way to floodgate any deck, really. So first things first, we're going to start off with the summon floodgates. These are the most common floodgates you'll probably see in the game. These are, Gozen and Rivalry. They've been very relevant for the last couple months, and even before that, we saw them in True Draco and decks like that. So, pretty much, summon floodgates are just floodgates that limit your opponent to what they can summon and how, well, mostly what and how much, I guess is the best way to put it, because Gozen, you look at Gozen says your opponent or each player can only contain 1 attribute on the field, and if they had others when you activate it, they have to send whatever didn't work, whatever's different attribute until they have 1 attribute still on their field. Same thing with Rivalry, except for only types of monsters, not attributes. And then there can only be 1, which is kind of like the opposite of Rivalry, which says each player can only control 1 monster of each type. And then you also have Summon Limit, which is a card that actually just recently got some play, very, very recently in the past weekend, and maybe it's also some play outside of that, but I had not been noticing it so far, and that's Summon Limit. This card literally says neither player can summon more than 2 times in a turn, period, whether it's normal, special, flip, tribute, 2 summons. And that's really, really good for any deck's just slow, because let's face it, every deck pretty much that's meta relevant is going to, if they can, try to summon more than 2 times a turn. So that's a really, really cool card there. But yeah, floodgates are just really good. Like I said, pretty much every single deck nowadays, if it's relevant, it probably special summons. Maybe you could say Altergeist doesn't really go after that. Maybe you say Trickstars aren't special summoning that much, or they don't need to. So there are decks that avoid this, but that's the risk you play with floodgates. Is not every floodgate hits every deck you're trying to, you're going to be playing against, because you don't know. And that's another thing that Konami has been really good with, is that every floodgate pretty much in the game limits both players. They hit you both, right? Gozen Match says each player can only control 1 attribute, not your opponent can only control 1 attribute. There are cards that say that, but those are usually more in-archetype cards or just less powerful floodgates, because it's just, it'd be too much to have a floodgate as strong as Summon Limit, but it only affected your opponent. So you could summon as much as you want, but your opponent can only summon twice. That would be too strong. So it needs to affect both players. So you need to play a deck that still works under the confines of your floodgates, and also be a floodgate that's going to affect most of the decks that you're going to be, expecting to play against. But so it hinders your deck building capabilities as well. So there are drawbacks to floodgates, but overall, as long as your deck still works under it, it's probably going to hurt your opponent more than it's going to hurt you, and that's the whole goal of these, really. So summon floodgates, really solid, really good. Also, another thing, we have floodgates can come in any kind of form. It can come in monster, trap, or spell. It can come in any of them, anything that's continuous, really, and monsters are continuous other than spirits, but So, and I forgot to put monsters up in these, little thumbnail, things, just because I just forgot, and I couldn't remember what was what, and then I literally thought about it. I was like, literally, like regular stun decks just only play monster floodgates. You play like Fossil Dyna, you say like Banisher of Radiance, you play like Thunder King Ryo and Inspector Border, and they all fit into these categories, obviously, right? Like Fossil Dyna fits right in here. Neither player can special summon monsters. Boom, fits perfectly into here, exactly. So there you go. I did want to say that, and I think traps are probably the best type of floodgates because not only can they be floodgates, but they can be disruptions into floodgates, if that makes sense. So trying to apply like goes and match and rivalry and stuff, the way they work is you can only control one attribute. So if you wait for your opponent to go through a play and they have 3-4 monsters and they're all different attributes, then you flip your floodgate, and not only is it going to floodgate them from there on, but they're also forced to be disrupted there and ditch, you know, however many monsters so that they only have one attribute left. So the traps are probably the best one because they can double as, disruption and a floodgate altogether. But so I just want to throw that out there before we move on to the next type of floodgate, which is what I call effect negate floodgates. And it's kind of exactly how they sound. I mean, they're all pretty basic names, but they all just negate different effects depending on, you know, which floodgate it is. So you have the 3 basic ones here, which are Skill Drain, Imperial Order, and Royal Decree. Sorry, Lose One Turn is kind of the odd man out here, but at least looking at those 3, Skill Drain, Imperial Order, and Royal Decree, they all kind of do the same exact thing, just for a different type of card. Skill Drain literally just says the effects of all face-up monsters on the field are negated while they're face-up on the field. Imperial Order says negate all spell effects on the field. Boom, there you go. And Royal Decree says negate all other trap effects on the field. So they literally all do the same exact thing, just for, you know, different types of cards. But obviously, just like we said on the last one, these floodgates affect you too. So while Skill Drain is up, your monsters are negated. While Imperial Order is up, your spells are negated. And while Royal Decree is up, your traps are negated. So just like we said before, you need to be playing a deck that doesn't really rely on that kind of way, or work around it specifically. Like in Skill Drain's instance, you look at decks like Weather Painters, where you can still activate your monster's effects. Their effects just won't resolve if they're on the field for that. So the Weather Painters like almost always banish themselves to activate their effects. So you literally would like banish one, then because they're not on the field anymore, Skill Drain isn't negating their effect anymore. So then their effect would resolve in the banish zone, voiding Skill Drain, while Skill Drain still is keeping your opponent from getting their monster effects. So there are other ways to work around these, but they're negating effects and they're insanely powerful. I mean, I've heard people talk about getting Skill Drain and Imperial Order completely banned. Royal Decree, like the game's been so far away from traps, not so far away, but like there's just not nearly, like traps used to be a staple because they were just so strong and the game was still like really normal summon dependent and like slower, that just every deck was just running staple powerful traps. So Royal Decree had much more value, but you know, unless it's specifically a trap deck, you don't see a deck playing traps anymore. So, but I've still heard people talk about Skill Drain and Imperial Order just getting completely banned. They're both at 1, by the way, so that goes to show you how powerful they are already. But I mean, I don't even know if I need to like explain to you why these are so powerful. There's only 3 lanes of effects you can use, period, in the entire game: monster, spells, and traps, and each of these just says no. Just no. You literally just, whatever you do, it cannot involve these effects on the field. And that can just be so detrimental to certain decks. I mean, like flipping Imperial Order on Sky Striker, you may just win the duel right there. You could have 2 cards in hand and it could be a 1900 beat stick and Imperial Order, and you may win the duel. Like, it's actually insane. So just keep that in mind. And then Lose One Turn is like a card I think is undervalued actually in like really normal summon reliant decks, but I think it could actually be a pretty strong floodgate in the right deck, and I think it's cool and I love the artwork, and so I threw it in here. But anyway, let's move to the last and final type of floodgate, and that's what I call no floodgates. So while the last ones negate effects, the effects can still happen. You know what I mean? Like, the effects can still be activated, they just won't resolve. And there are ways to work around them. Whereas these floodgates just say no. This stuff just can't even be done. And I threw Anti-Spell Fragrance in here. Keep in mind, I threw this in here because I wanted to include it because it's still one of the most relevant, you know, one of the more relevant Floodgate's still in the game, but I didn't think it perfectly fit into really any of the categories, so I just threw it into here. And also at the end when I was doing it, I realized I left Secret Village out, and I meant to put it in here, so I was like, screw it, I'll just throw it right in the middle, right, real tiny right in the middle. So ignore that. Sorry, I'm lazy. I'm not, but you know, I really didn't want to go back and do it. But anyway, these just straight up say the things can't happen. They don't negate the effects. So you look at a card like Mistake here on the far left. Just says neither player can add cards from the deck to their hand except by drawing. So nobody can search, period. Very strong in today's meta if you're playing a deck that doesn't really search. But there are other ways to avoid this. I mean, you look at certain decks that can work around this. I mean, Weather Painters, again, are a decent example just because a lot of their cards let you just place your weather canvases straight into your zones. That's not technically adding to hand, so you can just keep placing cards in your zone straight from the deck and gaining that advantage. You're just not technically searching, so you walk right past Mistake. They still do a little bit of searching, but that's just an example of how you can bypass it. Or you just play a deck that doesn't really search and you just play a ton of draw power. You could talk about just you look at decks like just regular stun, like we talked about before, where you just normal summon, you know, Inspector Border. You may have like Pot of Duality in the deck, Card of Demise in the deck, but that's drawing. That's not searching. So you have your draw power. You have your, you know, your resource game, I guess, on fleek in terms of draw power, but this card doesn't affect that. So that's really powerful there. Imperial Iron Wall saying neither player can banish cards. Prohibition saying you declare a card name on activation, and then while this card's face up, neither player can activate the effects of like cards with that name, which is actually incredibly powerful. If you know, like if you play Sky Striker and you just say like Sky Striker Ace Kagari and activate Prohibition, like it's going to be a real tough game for them. Anti-Spell Fragrance doesn't really fit in here, but I feel like we should talk about it real quick. Just again against Sky Striker, which has been the best deck, if not the second best deck for 6+ months now. Just saying that like a deck that plays 35 spell cards can't activate spell cards turn one. They have to set them first. So literally Sky Strikers have to go a whole turn of not playing at least. And then everything they draw and every spell they search has to get set first again. So really powerful against that matchup. And then the last one here is like Secret Village of the Spellcaster. Just says while you control spellcaster, your opponent does not. Your opponent can just not even activate spell cards. Just no. That's why I call these no floodgates. They don't even give your opponent a chance to activate but not be on the field, like we said with like Skill Drain. Just literally just says no, can't happen ever. So these ones may be the most influential, but also they have like sometimes tougher requirements, and they're also harsher on you too, like Mistake. Like almost every deck needs to search. If you don't need to search, you should probably just play Mistake. I mean, really. But every deck searches, so like that's why Mistake is kind of harsh, and you don't see it a ton because every deck kind of needs to search nowadays, and it hits you too. Floodgates are going to hit you too. So these are not my favorite floodgates. I think probably my favorite floodgates are the summon floodgates, because I'm not the biggest fan of combo decks, and these really do a number on combo decks, and not even full-on combo decks, even just decks that have smaller combos that end up having multiple monsters. These cards can be super punishing for those decks as well. So I really like all of these. I think floodgates are really cool right now. I actually think they're pretty good just because the game has been slower as of late. We don't see no FTKs really going around right now. No decks that just go first and set up turn one, just like unbreakable boards anymore. Like that's not really the game. So none of this stuff is like super crazy. I mean, I guess Thunder Dragons a little bit can set up like unbreakable boards, but not if they went second through a summon floodgate. I'll tell you that much. But guys, let me know what you think about floodgates right now. If you like them, if you don't like them. I'm a control player as is, and I don't really believe in playing a ton of floodgates. Sometimes you see deck profiles that it's like True Draco, or well, at least when True Draco was still like kind of in the top there, Paleos, and they literally just have like 3 goes in, 3 rivalry, and maybe even like another floodgate as well. And I'm just like, that's brutal. Like to some extent, like I'm down with playing like maybe 5 total in your deck. That way, like in any given duel, you can see 1, maybe 2. But like when you're playing like almost 10 floodgates in your deck, I'm just like, bro, you need to calm down, because like at some point, like you need to play too. You need to draw into other cards. Like you need other cards in your deck to play with. and it can't all just be stopping your opponent. You still need to play too. So I'm okay with a few, and if you see them, you see them. If you don't, you don't. That's kind of how I look at them. I just don't like floodgate dot decks. Those are not my jam. But guys, let me know what you think about floodgates. If you think they're good, if you think they're bad, if you think they're stupid, if you hate them because you're a combo player and people have been flipping floodgates on you since day one and it hurts to see. But yeah, that's my little talky chat about floodgates in general. So if you like this video, guys, subscribe for more stuff from me in the future, more videos and such. I can do more general discussions about different types of other cards as well. I mean, we have like any of the I could talk about, what are they called? I'm playing it so hard. The solemns, what are they called? What kind of traps are those? Oh my god, whatever they're called, the negate traps. I literally can't think of the word. I'm blanking so hard. That's so embarrassing. Whatever. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more stuff from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to get out of here before I just can't even think of what are they called.